AM 1460, the new WXBR. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. And joining us on the program right now is three-time Pro Wrestling Illustrated Manager of the Year and author of Rags, Paper, and Pins, the merchandising of Memphis Wrestling, Mr. Jim Cornette. Jim, thank you for joining us on the program this morning. And before we dive into the book, I want to get your thoughts on Sunday's Royal Rumble pay-per-view. I know you've been out of the business for about a year now, but I'm sure you've heard the pay-per-view was universally panned by fans across the board. What are your thoughts?
Well, and by the way, since I'm on the radio in beautiful downtown Boston, I have to send a shout-out to my friend Brutal Bob Evans, the honorary governor of Massachusetts, who would be offended if I didn't mention him. I love you, Bob. You know, the Royal Rumble just signifies more and more that there's what I've noticed in my time in Ring of Honor. There's what I've noticed over the past decade. There's a couple of different groups of wrestling fans now, and they don't seem to correlate because of the changes in the wrestling business. Mm-hmm. There are the loyal wrestling fans that enjoy seeing the stars that they like to watch, that wrestle and that have substance to them and that they believe are talented and qualified. They like to see those guys prosper, and Daniel Bryan fits right in that picture. And they get very upset when those guys don't prosper. And they're the fans who buy the pay-per-views. They're the fans who spend money to buy tickets to see the live events. They're the fans who buy the merchandise.
Right.
They're the fans who spend money and invest emotionally in the product. And then there's a large group of wrestling fans that has been made from what I call the sports entertainment phase, especially over the last decade, that just watches on TV for free because that's the thing you watch on TV for free, like your weekly television shows or your soap operas, or as my aunt used to call them, her stories. And wouldn't dream of actually buying, or, you know, they might get a T-shirt if they're at Kmart and they see it just as a hoot, right? But they're not going to go to a live event. If they do, it's maybe once in a year or two, you know, as something to see like Disney on Parade. And they're not going to buy the pay-per-view because there's, 4 million people watching Raw and they're selling 200,000 pay-per-views, so there's a disconnect there. The problem has become, in my humble opinion, that the TV networks have so much control over pro wrestling because of the rights fees that they pay, and the ratings are all important to the wrestling promoter, especially Vince. He's the only one who actually has legitimate ratings. That audience is the ones that they're trying to cater to, and it backfires when you try to do it in front of people that actually paid to get and see your product.
Boy, did it.
And that's unfortunately the same way. In Ring of Honor, it was a much smaller group of people all across the board, obviously, but there were fans who came to see their, private club, Ring of Honor, the underground internet phenomenon, and when it was bought by Sinclair Broadcasting, and the recipe for, disaster in pro wrestling promotion, just add suits, and I was unfortunately partially guilty in that because I was involved in getting it sold, but we had to get on television. There were a group of fans who loved the product because it was the best, hardest-hitting wrestling they'd seen on television. They didn't know it existed before. So you had two groups there. One didn't want any change to make it more mainstream, and the mainstream folks who did get involved thought it was the greatest thing they'd ever seen because they hadn't seen it before.
Right.
And wrestling is a very polarizing sport these days, and pro wrestling, as we know it or have known it for 100 years, has given way to sports entertainment for a generation. And right now, whatever it is you call what they do in the squared circle while they're wearing boots and tights, it is unfortunately constricted to where it's the only thing I can think of now in any field of endeavor where more people, sport, entertainment, whatever, more people used to like it and support it and spend money on it than do now. There's still a rabid fan base, but it's way not as big as it used to be.
Let's stay topical for the moment. With WrestleMania right around the corner, what are your thoughts on the Ultimate Warrior being inducted? And part two of this question is, now that the Warrior is in, when are we going to see James E. Cornette inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame?
Well, it wasn't that I was holding out until the Warrior got inducted. Maybe, I said one time I couldn't go in before Luthez was inducted, or Bruno. They got Bruno. Well, the Ultimate Warrior is obviously a marketing decision. He was a big, major star for 2 or 3 years for, the WWF in the 80s because of his physique and his look, and Vince loves bodybuilders, and he was smashed over. And as far as being a talent-worthy member of the Hall of Fame, Jesus, my Aunt Lola could probably, at the same age, have worked better than the Ultimate Warrior. And that's one of those things where, once again, the fans who like wrestling, who enjoy the great performers, they go, oh, they're putting him in. But from the WWF standpoint, and actually it's a correct one, they got a major name that people remember, especially the people that don't watch wrestling anymore. And they'll make a fortune off selling a DVD because, we haven't seen him in 15 years. What's he look like? What's he going to do? Blah, 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 et cetera. And that's it's two audiences. As far as me being in the Hall of Fame, I've answered this question these days by saying I didn't do anything in the WWF as a performer that I consider Hall of Fame worthy. I did manage the WWF champion Yokozuna, managed Bulldog and Owen, but nothing I did or necessarily was allowed to do was Hall of Fame worthy there. But my work with the Midnight Express, if you want to talk about legitimate Hall of Fame, yes, we're Hall of Fame worthy. They were the greatest heel tag team of the 80s, and we topped the list of in-ring talents and promo talents. And I don't think they're ever going to ask us because they can't sell a DVD, and we never wrestled there.
Maybe one day, Jim. Maybe one day.
So I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep, and I wouldn't stand in the way of it, but I wouldn't be packing my bag.
So let's delve into the book. What made you want to write Rags, Paper, and Pins, the merchandising of Memphis Wrestling? I know that you yourself have a large memorabilia collection in your own home. Was that an inspiration to write this book?
Well, yes, in large part, and also, and by the way, for anybody listening, anything that we're going to be talking about, go to JimCornette.com. That's JimCornette.com, my website, newly redesigned and revamped, and you can find a link to everything that we talk about here, whether it's the books, whether it's the merchandise, whether it's my appearances, my upcoming UK tour, my weekly podcast, et cetera, et cetera. I wrote the book because I had done well with my Midnight Express and Jim Cornette 25th anniversary scrapbook that I published in 2009. A great, basically the great pictures and memos and paycheck stubs and receipts and paperwork and contracts that I had accumulated over my years as the manager of the Midnight Express, plus our complete record of 7 years as a team, the dates, the places, the matches, the results, the gate information, behind-the-scenes stories, road stories, etc. And we still, as a matter of fact, are selling that on the website. It's been so popular. It went into second printing. So I had a background with doing the books. And then Mark James, who does MemphisWrestlingHistory.com, is a good friend of mine. And I'd seen some of the books that he's done and decided to do something similar involving my memorabilia collection, and it's kind of a combination autobiography of my teenage years and the way that I got into pro wrestling as a photographer and ring announcer, and also a history of Memphis merchandising, which they were on the cutting edge of the merchandising of wrestling, back before you could get, bed sheets and pillowcases and Titantrons and dolls and action figures. They had a great variety of merchandise that was sold in the arenas, and my photography was amongst that. And we reprinted a lot of the magazines that we sold at the matches. We went to the arena programs back to the 50s, recapped the big rivalries and gates and crowds and showdowns of the 50s through the glory period of the 80s, and even included a chapter on wrestlers' records. Memphis being the home of the blues and the birthplace of rock and roll, wrestlers did records, and they actually did well. And we've reprinted some of those lost gems and the lyrics and also the behind-the-scenes stories. Sam Phillips, obviously, who was the head of Sun Records, was even friends with Jimmy Valiant, Sputnik Monroe, Jackie Fargo, etc. So if Elvis had not walked in Sun Records that day, it could have been Sputnik Monroe that invented rock and roll. We don't know.
Now, I know this is like asking you to pick between your favorite kids, but do you have a favorite piece of memorabilia from your collection?
Yeah, and actually, if you go on the website, JimCornette.com, and that's with an E on the end of Cornette, there's a section from the vault where I have pictures and personal anecdotes on some of the rarest pieces of memorabilia in my collection, and it would probably be the bound set of St. Louis programs from Sam Muchnick's promotions in St. Louis, which was the Cadillac, the Lincoln Continental of wrestling cities from 1945 until his retirement in 1982. And it's autographed by all the former great NWA world champions of the 60s and 70s and 80s. The Funk Brothers, Gene Kiniski, Jack Briscoe, Ric Flair, even Sam Muchnick himself, Harley Race. And it's one of a kind in the world. That's my favorite, and you can see that actually on the website.
It's very cool. We're chatting with Jim Cornette, author of Rags, Paper, and Pins, the merchandising of Memphis Wrestling right here on the new WXBR 1460. What set...
And you know, I got to just interrupt you one second.
Sure.
The way the title came about of the book, and you might have read the story, is that Sputnik Monroe, who was the grizzled old veteran, used to say when all the good guys would go out to the merchandise stand to sell their merchandise and autograph their pictures, well, there they go, selling their rags, paper, and pens. and he was such a character. I tell the story in the book that it was Sputnik that led to the integration of sporting events in the South, because when he got over as a main event wrestler in the late 50s in Memphis, he especially appealed to the black population. He would go walking down Beale Street and drink in the clubs and be arrested. His crime was associating with black people on Beale Street in Memphis, and he was a white guy. And so he began drawing huge crowds of black folks to see his matches at a time when business in Memphis was down, but they couldn't sit ringside or on the floor. They had to sit in the bleachers, in the balcony in the Ellis Auditorium. And as the story goes, and promoter Roy Welch was probably behind this in spirit because he liked money. His favorite color was not black or white, but green. Sputnik said, if you don't let my black friends into the matches, you keep turning them away and their seats empty, then I'm going to leave. And they integrated the wrestling matches in Memphis and suddenly found out that they didn't have any riots, and everybody, the world still turned, and it spread to other events in Memphis and around that part of the South. So he is actually immortalized as Sputnik Monroe in the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum for his contributions toward the integration of the South.
Jim, tell us what set Memphis Wrestling apart from the other promotions around at the time.
Well, that's why I'm so excited about doing these books with Mark, because he and I are both grew up Memphis Wrestling fans, and we've got an entire series of wrestling history books that we're planning for release this year and next. And it was such a fascinating world. The documentary Memphis Heat kind of painted the picture that it was a regular real-life Rocky movie that came to life in front of you for a $4 ticket every Monday night in the Mid-South Coliseum. And it just had an ardent group of followers, and also the TV ratings in Memphis. At one time in the late 70s and early 80s, Memphis Wrestling was the highest-rated local television program of any kind in America. It was on an NBC affiliate, and they preempted Major League Baseball games when they conflicted with the wrestling program, because the wrestling program did higher ratings. So it was really a different culture, and we were lucky enough to grow up and see it happen in front of us, and we're trying to keep those stories alive.
Now, you've done more than just being a manager on the outside of the ring. Behind the scenes, you were instrumental in scouting talent and booking matches for many of the top promotions in the United States. Years and years ago, I saw an interview where you pegged Batista to be the next big star, and I got to say, you hit the nail on the head right there. But who are some of the young and up-and-comers today that catch your eye that can carry professional wrestling into the future? Well,
and once again, I've not toot my own horn, but toot. It wasn't hard, but I predicted The Rock, I predicted Randy Orton, I predicted John Cena, I predicted Batista, trained all of them except The Rock in OVW here in Louisville, Ohio Valley Wrestling, because you could tell that they had the look, they had the talent, they had the desire. In some cases, they had all three. Batista had the look, Cena had the look, desire, and talent. Orton had the look and the talent, not necessarily the desire at first, but there was always a combination of those things. You see where I'm going with this, man?
Right.
And so it's not hard to predict who can be a star, but it's gotten hard to predict who's going to be a star these days, because when you see a guy get tremendous reaction like Daniel Bryan, you would think, and I've always been a fan of his because he's been a great wrestler. He was unlikely to be a star in the WWE. He did not have the look or the size that Vince usually likes, but the fans took to him and made him that way, at least the ones that pay money to see the product. I look at a lot of guys these days, and I guess I'm looking at guys like the people who pay to see the product. I love Dolph Ziggler. He's another guy we trained in OVW. I think he's a talented kid. Love Daniel Bryan. There's other guys that I think are great talents and could be stars, but whether they will be given the opportunity to remains to be seen because they don't fit into either the WWE definition of what a star is supposed to look like, or possibly their mainstream we're just going to watch on TV and are measured by your ratings section of fans thinks a star should be, because that's what they've been told a star should look like. So it's not easy. Probably in a 25-minute interview, we're not going to solve that problem.
You've recently taken a step back from the wrestling world to focus on your family and health. What keeps you busy these days?
Well, actually, I'm almost busier now. I'm not really busier now because I make my own schedule. When you make your own schedule, you're never busier than you used to be when somebody else did it for you. But I got off the road. I was on the road 100-plus nights a year. I was driving in the car 40,000 miles a year. I got off the road. I lost 50 pounds because too many of my contemporaries were having heart attacks. I found great enjoyment in doing yard work this year when it was hot, and I'd go outside and sweat and lose weight and get something accomplished at the same time. But I am still busy. I do a weekly podcast on MLW.com, the Jim Cornette Experience, and we have been growing in leaps and bounds just in the time we've been on the air, or on the internet, I should say, since November. I'm on Twitter at the Jim Cornette with 65,000 some followers and growing. At the Jim Cornette, because somebody got Jim Cornette and he's only got like 212 followers. They figured that out quick. I'm headed to the United Kingdom in February for a 2-week tour of Glasgow, Birmingham, Manchester, London's Leicester Square Theatre, Cardiff, Wales, some seminars and dinners. The first time I've ever been in the United Kingdom. And once again, for all these things, just go to JimCornette.com, click on the banners or click on the events and appearances. We're also actually doing a Kickstarter now,
yes,
because we thought, well, this is going to be a good idea since I'm going to be in the UK for the first time ever for 2 solid weeks doing all these shows. What if you take the world's most outspoken wrestling personality, plop him in the middle of a foreign country for the first time ever, and wire him up for video and audio 24/7, including a dashboard cam, sightseeing footage, even me drooling on the plane when I'm Xanax so that I can fly across an ocean. And we're going to do a documentary, and we've gotten great response to the Kickstarter. We actually just got, although this will not show up on the tallies for a short time, but we just got an executive producer spot landed, made a deal arranged, and we're going to be putting a documentary out of that. I'm also doing a lot of comic book conventions. I'll be at the Lexington Comic Con at Rupp Arena Lexington Center in March 14th through the 16th at Lexington, Kentucky. I'm going to be at the Mid-South Wrestling Legends Fan Fest in New Orleans, April the 4th, with the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, Bill Dundee, and Cowboy Bill Watts. I'll be hosting all their Q&As, and I'm excited about that. I'm actually talking to Spinguli, my favorite horror movie show host, on MeTV, nationally syndicated out of Chicago. We're going to be doing a promotion later on this spring at Victoria, Lisa Marie Barron's Squared Circle restaurant in Chicago. I was there for New Year's Eve. So unfortunately, I'm busier now, like I said, than I was when I was in wrestling. I'm just not waking up mad every morning because somebody else is screwing up my efforts to have fun and be successful.
Speaking of the Midnight Express, how's Bobby Eaton doing these days?
Bobby just got out of the hospital a couple of days ago. He's had rough problems with diabetes. He'd had a pacemaker put in July, and he has, unfortunately, a lot of fluid retention because he's like all of us middle-aged men, and I was until last year. He doesn't take care of himself and take his medicine right, and we're trying to correct that. But, that's the epiphany that I had last year when I was on the road all the time eating cheesesteaks and pizza instead of trying to take care of my health, is that if Jerry Lawler can have a heart attack, anybody can. Only I wouldn't be lucky like the King and do it on live TV in front of a doctor and 2 blocks down from the best cardiac care unit in the country. I would be at the county fair somewhere in Wartburg, Tennessee, with the guy running the Ferris wheel standing over me saying, well, he ain't going to make it.
You'd be at some Dairy Queen somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to take. I told the King, I saw him in Memphis at a comic book convention in November, because I'm a big comic book fan, also have a huge collection there. And anyway, I saw Jerry. I came up and hugged him. I said, I want to thank you for what you did for me. And he said, what's that? I said, you died. It was the best thing anybody's ever done for my health.
We're chatting with Jim Cornette, author of Rags, Paper, and Pins, the merchandising of Memphis Wrestling. Are there any other books in the works, Jim?
Oh, yeah, we're doing a 3-volume set on the history of Louisville wrestling, which has always fascinated me. It was the secondary town in the Memphis territory, but did great for years, but actually goes back to the 20s and 30s. Strangler Lewis wrestled here, Wild Bill Longson and Lou Thez in the 40s, and Buddy Rogers in the 50s. We have come to find out that we believe we're going to be able to make a case that more Major League Pro Wrestling events were held at the Louisville Gardens in the 20th century than any other arena in the country, and a local author is doing some research with me on that to prove it. So it's going to be a couple or 3 volumes in a set of Louisville wrestling history, along with all the old programs and newspaper ads that go with it. My books are very visual and contain a lot of memorabilia reproductions. And I'm also working on, for hopefully the fall, a book on the story of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, the promotion that I operated in Tennessee in the 90s, which has just been featured in a major article on WWE.com, thanks to the guys up there, and, seems to remain popular with a lot of the wrestling fans of the 90s. So we're doing that book. And as my friend Kenny Boland would say, I've got my finger in a few other things as well, and I've also just been asked to star in a very, very low budget movie being shot in southern Ohio, where I play an evangelist who's really secretly a flesh-eating pig monster. So that's
all right.
I'm doing a lot of prep work for that.
The book is called Rags, Paper, and Pins, the merchandising of Memphis Wrestling. It's available everywhere, but the best place to go is JimCornette.com. Follow him on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. And any last words before we let you go?
No, I just want to say, I appreciate everything. I've had some great times up there in Boston. I love the New Englanders. My wife wants to come to Salem, so I'm talking to some promoters now about doing some one-man shows up there in the spring or summer, because my wife would love to come to Salem and cast a spell on somebody. So I love all my Boston residents.
And we love you too, Jim. I appreciate you coming on the program this morning. I will make sure I tell Brutal Bob Evans you said hello, and we will talk to you soon. I'd love to have you back on the program again, hopefully a longer segment next time.
Thank you very much. Hey, I appreciate it. And listen, I'd be glad to come back. Just get a hold of me, because I can be had. I have been many times.
You're listening to AM 1460, the new WXBR. We'll be back right after this.